Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today we're here to talk about everyone's favorite method of Switch 2 distribution, the game keycards. Now, this is a very difficult video for me to make because I'm not normally the type of guy that likes to make essays. I prefer to do reviews and I prefer to do psychology breakdowns. So maybe I'm not the most skilled at this, but I do want to clarify right away that I know that a lot of people who are in the minority get their words taken out of context a lot. So I'm going to try my best to try to see things from both sides, from the perspective of people who like the Switch 2 versus people that cannot stand the system and cannot stand Nintendo in general, compile the data that I've thought of, and then give my perspective, because I like to read people's comments. And I thought surely at least one person would agree with me, but no, they haven't. But first, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. First off, what are game keycards and what is the difference between simply inserting a physical version of a game into the Switch 2? Put simply, if you have a regular cartridge for a Switch 1 or a Switch 2 game, you can insert it into the system and then play the game. Now, admittedly, most games nowadays on both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 do require a patch in order to play it optimally, and usually those patches are out on day one, but they can still be played if you don't have an internet connection. With game keycards, you have to download the entire game after you put the cartridge into the Switch 2. As far as I'm aware, this is a Switch 2 exclusive thing. I think Switch 1 games had download codes in a box where you didn't even have the cartridge. You just get a piece of paper inside the packaging, and then you'd enter in that code on the eShop, and then you'd be able to download the game. This is essentially that, except instead of having a code, you have a cartridge. And that's basically the only difference. And the reason why people are mad at this, from what I can tell, again, reading the comments, trying to see what other people's opinions are before I make mine, the consensus is that it's not good for physical game preservation because people want ownership of their games. And according to Nintendo's terms of service, they have the right to terminate your digital library whenever they want. So even if technically you bought a game digitally off of the eShop, you don't own it. It's only a matter of time before you lose access to it. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you want to feel like you have ownership of the game. Okay, that's fair. I certainly wouldn't like it if all of a sudden I wasn't able to play Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, despite the fact that I have the physical version and I've bought all of the DLC. And so I started to think, well, when I first heard about game keycards, I initially did not see what the problem was. I thought, okay, it takes slightly more time to download, but in the short term, not thinking about the future, I'm thinking about right now, in this present moment, is that really a big deal? And the argument that people would use online was always, but I don't feel like I own the game. I want to have ownership. And here's where I come in. And again, I have scoured through so many comments. Not a single person is on my side here. And I think it's because what I'm about to say is not a widespread way of playing games. And that's, why not just rent games? And here's why renting for game keycards works, whereas download codes do not. Download codes are a one-time use thing. Once you enter in that code, that piece of paper, and conversely the code becomes completely useless. But game keycards are set up in a very unique way. I do not know how to explain the tech behind it, but basically, you can insert the cartridge into the Switch 2. Then download the game off of the internet. But then, when you're done with it, you can give that cartridge to someone else so that that person can play the game. In other words, you're able to share the game, as opposed to the download codes where you're 100% forced to be selfish. And the reason why this works so well for me is that most of the time, I really don't care about game ownership. I like having GameFly because they allow me to play as much of the game as I want without having the obligation to spend the full price. And a lot of the games that I used to own before I had my financial disaster where I had to sell most of my games and accessories just to make even, I would think, how often am I actually going to play these games? What's the point of collecting them? And I get it. There are people that want to collect out there, and I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to say that your opinion is invalid, and I'm certainly not defending game keycards as a whole. Again, as a whole, we're getting to the nuance in a bit, but I do hope that in the future, Nintendo will give third parties the ability to put the entire games on the cartridge, just in case you don't have a bad internet connection or if people want that feeling of ownership. But in the meantime, if we are forced to be in a society where the alternative is not being able to play it on the Switch 2 at all, game keycards are good for people like me who do not want to own the game, we just want to play it. Then game keycards allow the game to be rentable on GameFly, and then I can experience it without having to pay for it. And you might be thinking, now, Paul, is that legal? Well, I have talked to GameFly representatives on quite a lot of occasions, and at least 2 of them that I can recall said that they need the publisher's approval in order for the games to be on the platform at all. So if this wasn't ethical, then surely Nintendo wouldn't give their approval. But I'm not paying Nintendo for the games. GameFly are the ones that are paying for the games. I'm paying for their services to ship them. And as a reward for being a GameFly customer, I can get discounts on these games if I do decide, hey, I like this enough to buy it. But the problem with me is that I'm a skeptic. I am the type of person that I want to know if a game is worth it before I pay for it. And that's what I like about renting, is I have the option to ascertain for myself if the game is worth buying or not. Goodness knows there have been so many times where other people's opinions have really duped me. Like, for example, one time I was at a GameStop and I was looking at The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, and the person behind the counter said, "Oh my gosh, Phantom Hourglass is the greatest game ever made, and you really should buy that because that game is so amazing." So I did. I took his word for it, and I said, well, Nintendo Power gave it a 9.5, and all these people are saying it's great, and you're saying it's great, and I trust your opinions, so I guess I'll go ahead and buy it. So I paid the full price, which was way more fair than Switch 1 and Switch 2 games nowadays were, and I hated it. I thought that it controlled really clunky. I thought the Temple of the Ocean King was some nightmarish level design because they would force you to replay entire sections of it after you got through every major dungeon. There was only one dungeon theme. Even the final dungeon had the same music as the first one. The graphics were underwhelming. It felt like a poor man's version of Wind Waker. Pretty much the only thing I liked about Phantom Hourglass were there were a handful of good puzzles, like the one where you had to blow into the DS to extinguish a candle. I thought that was pretty cool. But it was the kind of game that I felt like I got cheated out of my money. Because I was like, had I known that this would be such a bad game, I wouldn't have spent all that money on it. It would have been better if I had been able to try it, like how GameStop has kiosks where you can play the game for a little bit, and say, okay, I played it for about this amount of time, and I realized that the game is not for me. So now I don't have to take the risk. GameFly, from my perspective, is basically like having that kiosk in your house. But instead of having instant access, you have to wait for the copies to show up in the mail. And for the people that like to rent, the game keycard is a good compromise for us, even if people that like ownership, it's terrible. So my advice is not to defend this practice for people that want to own their games. It's to say, if we have to tolerate game keycards, then they make it easier for those of us who like rentals, is really all I'm trying to say. I do believe that when a person purchases something, they have the right to ownership of it. I know Nintendo has the mentality of the goblins in Harry Potter, where they believe the maker is the rightful owner. There's a reason why Rowling portrayed those people as the bad guys in a majority of the situations in that book. Because the wizards are like, we paid for it, why aren't we allowed to do what we want with our purchases? And thankfully, Nintendo first-party games are all on the cartridges, because Nintendo is the master of compression, as far as I'm aware. They managed to get 1,068 songs in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, for crying out loud, despite the fact that Wii U discs actually have more storage space than Switch cartridges, but they still managed to make it work. and with little to no compromises, which I greatly appreciated. With game key cards, there's really no difference between the digital and the physical versions, besides the fact that you can take it in or out of the system, and then when you're done with it, you can let other people play it. So it gives more of a sense of sharing, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, you don't have to keep the game for yourself. You can give it to other people as well. Whereas if I buy a game exclusively digitally, something that I've often said to my brother and my sister-in-law all the time is, I wish I could let you borrow. Now, from what I've heard, the Switch 1 does have a virtual game card system. I'm not well versed enough on that to explain how that works, but I don't think that's relevant to this discussion. What matters is that if you do not care about ownership of a game, then GameFly, or the library, it doesn't have to be GameFly. Some libraries allow you to rent games without paying even for a monthly subscription service. You just won't have the benefits that GameFly has. Like, for example, I have a library near my house that lets me rent games. But as far as I'm aware, they don't have Switch 2 games, and you can only rent the games for 2 weeks before you have to give them back. You can't renew them, and they give you a fee if you're late in returning them. And also, a lot of times, they don't have the full selection that GameFly has. GameFly has pretty much every game I want. It's very rare when they don't have a game that has been announced to have a physical version. Heck, they even had No Sleep for Kaname Date, which I specifically remember thinking they wouldn't have, because Spike Chunsoft announced it as exclusive to their website, but lo and behold, they ended up having both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 versions. The Switch 1 version was entirely on the cartridge, but the Switch 2 version was a game keycard release. Now, in the case of No Sleep for Kaname Date, I was able to buy it for $7 off of the eShop, but that was because I had a gift card. Before I had the gift card, I told myself that I didn't see the game as a long-term purchase. Like, it was the kind of game where once I had beaten it, then I would just turn it back in and get another game. But I said, if this gift card can bring it down to $7, I feel like that's a good enough compromise. Especially because I ended up buying both the original a.k.a. the Somnium Files and Nirvana Initiative once they went on sale. And I had decided for myself, hey, I like these games, that now I want to own them. So renting first can be like a trial period that has no expiration. And the game keycards allow for that trial period to happen. Now, is this a good idea in the long run? I am not the right person to ask, because I can barely predict what's going to happen 2 months from now. But what I can say is that I think for all of the people that are spreading all of the hate toward game keycards, your feelings are valid. You have the right to want to own something that you pay for. But I think at the very least, people should mention GameFly as an alternative. Or, and not necessarily GameFly. They could mention the library. They could mention sharing games with other people. They could mention stuff like garage sales. There are options to be able to play these games without necessarily having to own them. Or if price is the issue, if you do like owning games, but they're just too darn expensive, game keycards can be a way to get these games at a more affordable price, especially if you go to something like a GameStop where you can trade in something to get something else. So overall, I'm not trying to change anyone's minds if they would prefer to own games. And I'm certainly not going to say I am ungrateful to the fans for raging at Sega for initially announcing Sonic Racing Crossworlds to be a keycard release, and then Sega backtracked and said, no, we'll actually put the full game on the cartridge. I am very grateful for those people. And I know lately the narrative has been that Nintendo does not listen to the fans, and for the most part, I agree. They are incredibly stubborn. But that's not to say that they never, ever listen to the fans. They listened when Operation Rainfall happened, and that got them to localize Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower. They listened to the petition that wanted Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door to be remastered, and as far as I can tell, really the only major complaint people have had about it is that it runs at 30 frames instead of 60. And for me personally, yes, it was noticeable, but it certainly wasn't game-breaking. Everything else was such a dramatic improvement, and then there was the Smash ballot, and Nintendo flat out acknowledged who the top 2 people in the Smash ballot were, including Banjo and Kazooie, which were the number 2 most requested worldwide fighters. And that was my pick. And they listened. So, at the very least, they listened to a random Catholic nobody that just happened to sign a couple of petitions saying, hey, I'd like Banjo and Kazooie and Smash, and hey, I'd like to see Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door get a remaster. And there have been other times where they've listened. You just have to be willing to do the research. Is there a likely possibility that Nintendo will listen to the game keycard outrage? I would say the odds are relatively low, but not impossible. So, spread the news about how much you don't like game keycards. Spread the news that Nintendo is being anti-consumer. And spread the news that they make some pretty scummy decisions. But also, make sure to tell people the alternative, the legal alternative. I am not endorsing piracy. I am not endorsing emulation. But I am endorsing renting. Because as far as I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, renting is a perfectly legal way to play games without needing to own them. And let me give you an example of a game that's the definition of a rental. Mario Strikers Battle League. You've seen pretty much everything that game has to offer in like 15 minutes. Who honestly feels happy about owning that game? Plus, it's one of those games where you pretty much exclusively play online anyway. So that's an example of where I think if more people had promoted the idea of renting that game instead of paying $60 darn for a game that had less content than a GameCube game, then maybe more people would have been willing to give it a try, and maybe they would have been nicer. They still would have said, yeah, the game lacks content, and it's pushing out an unfinished game and releasing more content for it later. They still would have complained, but I think maybe more people would have been willing to give it a try, because they would say, well, if I'm only renting it, then that's a more cost-effective way, and I don't have to pay full price for something that's only going to last me like 15 to 20 minutes. So that's what I'm saying, is for upcoming games, like at the time of this video, Persona 3 Reload was just announced at a Nintendo Direct. And at the moment, it's a keycard release. If it weren't for that keycard release, I would not be able to play it, because I don't have a PS4, I don't have a PS5. I do have a PC, but I don't particularly like gaming on it. I've tried a few games on it. It is really uncomfortable unless you're playing humongous entertainment games. So I would much rather play a Persona game with a control stick than with a keyboard. And the Switch 2 gives me the opportunity to do that. And if I have to do a keycard, I'm obviously not going to buy it, because I don't even know if I'll like the game or not. But if I do a keycard, I can try it. Maybe I'll only get an hour in, and then I'll say that it's not worth it. But then I won't have lost any money, because I'm already paying for the rental subscription. It's even better if you go to the library, because you don't even have to pay for a library card. You can rent Persona 3 Reload, say this game isn't for me, turn it back in at no additional loss of money. The only alternative I can think of is if you still have the receipt, if you buy a game physically, you could hypothetically get all your money back. But then you really have to feel like you're rushing. Like, oh, I have to hurry up and make up my mind because receipts to give full money back only take so much time. And I just feel like that's not a very efficient way to do things. So consider renting the next time you think that game keycards have no redeeming features whatsoever. With that, I hope I have made myself clear. I hope that if you're the type of person who's watching this and you want to make a video essay about my points, I hope you realize that I do read and respond to just about every comment that I get. So I would hope that you would comment on the video first and say, hey Paul, I'd like to start a dialogue. Or even say like, hey, can I email you and we can talk about this? Or set up a video chat. I would appreciate it if we did that, because I have way more time to answer my comments, and I do want to make sure that I have the time to clear up any misunderstandings before there's any internet drama. So I would really appreciate it if you would do that. But just know that I respect everyone's opinions that don't like game keycards, but I also think that there's literally no one on the internet who's promoting my side of things, who is promoting the idea that renting could be an alternative. So just consider that. If you don't like it, you don't have to subscribe to it. I'm not saying everyone has to rent, but at least be aware that that's an option. And maybe you can enjoy more games that would otherwise either be too expensive or not worth paying the asking price. So thank you very much for watching, my friends. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!